Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you so much for those that are tuning in right now to our Diversity in the Workplace panel series today. I'm Carmen Gold Johnson. I work in the Career and Professional Development Center, and I'm excited to be co-hosting this with some great partners today. It really has, this conversation has started in various different ways and coming together in community today with James Jackson, who works with the Black Chamber of Commerce as well as diversity career fair as well, and also works within Zions Bank. And then also working with our alumni association office as well with Gabby and Karen. So I'm really excited to bring this conversation together of undergraduate students and alumni to really, talk about and hear from these panelists about how they've navigated the workforce with their various backgrounds and really take a step in terms of moving that needle forward to make more inclusive spaces and really create recruitment for our diverse professionals here in Utah. So again, thank you so much for joining us in this discussion today. I am now going to turn my time to Gabby from the Alumni Office.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. As Carmen said, my name is Gabby Sanchez-Jones, and I'm the manager of Alumni Clubs and Diverse Community Engagement here at the U Alumni Relations Office. I'm grateful today that we are joined by 4 fantastic alumni, 3 of whom will be panelists for us today. The first is Natasha Washington, who received a Bachelor's in Fine Arts in 2004 from the University of Utah. She teaches at the Now and Next Dance Mentoring Project and co-directs the Utah-based dance company Raw Moves. Her choreography has been seen in many professional, collegiate, and secondary school companies in Utah, Virginia, and Texas. As a voluptuous Black woman raised in an LDS Southern family, making her way in a white dance community, Washington has a multifaceted lens. She negotiates stereotyping, privilege, and identity every day in her work and enjoys and loves the challenges that the issues present. So thank you for being here. Our next panelist is Charlotte Miller, who received her Juris Doctorate from the University of Utah in 1983. She is a member of the U Alumni Board of Governors, as well as the S.J. Quinney College of Law Board of Trustees. She is currently the Assistant Director and HR Leader of the Salt Lake Legal Defender Association and has served as General Counsel and Executive HR Leader for multiple Utah companies. Miller was elected to be the President of the Utah State Bar and has been recognized as Utah Lawyer of the Year, Pro Bono Lawyer of the Year, and with an award for the advancement of women in the legal profession. She also serves on the Task Force for Racial and Ethnic Fairness in the Utah justice system. Thank you for being here, Charlotte. Our final panelist is Nav Dhaliwal, who received a bachelor's in 2015, as well as a master's degree in public administration in 2017. He is a member of the U Alumni Board of Governors and is the Chief Operating Officer for NeighborWorks Salt Lake, a nonprofit creating opportunities for affordable housing in safe and sustainable neighborhoods. Previous employment includes financial management roles at Morgan Stanley, Northwestern Mutual, and U of U Health. Nav has studied international business and economics at the University of Cambridge. Thank you to all of our alumni for being here today. We hope that this series, while encompassing a few of our diverse alumni, that in the future we'll be able to invite even more perspectives to this event and continue to have these important conversations.
Great, thank you, Gabby. Is that my cue to start? All right, sounds good, thank you. I wasn't sure when I can go ahead and get things going. Well, it's a pleasure to be part of this panel discussion and moderate today. And thank you so much for this opportunity to connect with Natasha, Charlotte, and Nav. Nav, we met at NeighborWorks Salt Lake. I was trying to put that name together, but last year when we painted at Paint Your Heart Out, that's where I remember us getting to know each other. So great, it's excited to, and then look forward to learning more about Natasha and Charlotte as well. So what I want to do is to start off a question and just open it up to the panel first, and I may have some questions that goes directly to each one of you panelists. But as a native of Utah, I've kind of seen the progression of diversity in the workplace in Utah. When I founded the Utah Black Chamber, we was 8.8% Black population. And I felt like every Black family knew every other Black family in Utah. And now where we are today, where 1 out of 5 people in Utah are actually a person of color, and seeing the variety of diversity here in Utah has been extraordinary. And one of my goals is to help to build retention. So when people come here to go to school, that they stay here, that the opportunities are here are more inclusive for everybody, and people can be their most authentic self. So my first question to the panelists is, what do you consider the most difficult challenge in Utah, as in the Utah workplace for you as a person of color, as a woman, within your career space? And we want to jump in on that question. And maybe choose one of y'all, because I will. Natasha, you're smiling so great. Why don't you go ahead and start us off? You got to unmute yourself. There you go.
So, James, I'm going to need you to say that one more time. Say the question one more time for me.
Sure, absolutely. What do you consider is the most difficult challenge in your career as a professional here in Utah?
One of the hardest challenges I have been experiencing is feeling as though I have to be the voice or the mouthpiece for students of color with my white colleagues, and explaining, oh man, this is a loaded question. Oh man, one experience, here's one experience. My first day at my new job 3 years ago, we were talking about the multicultural celebration that happens at the school annually. And in that, one of the things that was shared was the African girls and the Black girls were up on stage shaking their butts. But if you know anything about African dance, you know that hips is a central focus in the art form itself. But it's interesting to hear my white colleagues, how easily it is for them to share things like that with me, and they don't at this point know me. And so knowing how comfortable they feel saying these type things to an adult that they don't know, it scares me, or what is said to students who don't have the same power dynamic or structure or the ability to stand up for themselves. So I'll shut up, but it's being the spokesperson for all of our students of color.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a burden to carry, right? As a person of color, we navigate the Utah. We're not only representing ourselves sometimes, we're also representing, you know, the rest of diversity. People look at us, you know, in the homogenous state that we're in, they see one of us, and then we're going to be the representation for everybody else. And that's something that we do have to be cognizant of as we progress and growing more in diversity. And Charlotte, for you, working in not only but perhaps a homogenous industry, but also a male-dominated industry, what's been your experience as a woman in being a woman attorney?
Well, so I think there's some similarities, and that one, you're expected to be what all women are. If you ever hear somebody say, well, we hired a woman once and then she didn't stay at the firm or the company, so they never track how many men don't stay, right? But because you stick out as a woman, because maybe there's a minority of women in a particular workplace, everything one woman does is represented then of all women everywhere. I also think there's been a very fine line that women have to walk. And, you know, I started practicing law in 1983, and I certainly thought then we would be a lot further along now than we are, but we have made progress and we need to recognize that. But I still think there is this fine line of you have to be assertive enough, but not too assertive. So, you know, you don't want to, people often either see women, if they fall off that tightrope, either as they're not strong enough, they're too soft, they're too emotional, they're too whatever on that side, or on the other side, they're a bitch. And it's very hard to constantly stay on that little narrow path. And generally men, especially white men, aren't held to that same very narrow path.
That's a very powerful point you bring up, Charlotte. You know, that aspect, of that power dynamic and and just the experience as a woman as opposed to a male. Like if a woman tries to have that same type of elevated voice that a male has, seems almost confrontational, because women are supposed to be the soft nature type individuals, but yet you're in that position because of your background, because of your education, your experience. You just want to be represented in that same way. And so, Nav, I want to bring you in on this conversation. What do you feel like Utah is doing well to be more inclusive, and maybe what can we do better, as to what from the responses of Natasha and Charlotte? Let's get you off mute.
So the mainstream culture in Utah is very particular, and it's really, it has been male dominant throughout the years. When I was working at Morgan Stanley, we had a number of diversity and inclusion type trainings that were really helpful. And I also think that more organizations and more companies are starting to have these trainings take place. But I think, one of the most effective methods is just constant reinforcement within meetings. Within your any space you have, your staff continuously reinforce, we want to promote, new ideas and thoughts. We want to be open-minded. So, please be willing to speak up. I think it goes beyond just the trainings. There has to be, a constant push towards being better, more inclusive, and I think most importantly, an openness and a willingness to learn and embrace new cultures. Because I think certain workforces, and I don't want to say any in particular, but certain workforces have a very particular type of culture that has been sustained over a set period of time, and those are hard to break. But if you start with what you have, and then you also, when you have new hirees and new employees, really try to bring in individuals who are willing to embrace that open-mindedness and that willingness to learn about new cultures and ideas, it can really help promote inclusion within your workspace.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nat, for that answer, because so often, even as myself, I've been asked to come in and consult or train other companies because of my role with Utah Black Chamber and other roles that I play in the community. And I always want to remind them, it's more than just training, right? It's a culture that you have to create within your organization to continue to keep the conversation going. So to help, one of those things that kind of help keep the ongoing conversation within meetings is a term that's grown more common space in over this last several months with the civil unrest, are allies. And I feel if we start creating, having more allies within our workplace, then that can help create more inclusivity. So, Natasha, I'll go back to you. People are always asking me, how can I be a better ally? What can I do to support you better? What would you say, with given in your career field, in the beautiful world of dance, what can you say? How can people within your industry be a better ally for women and people of color?
I'm gonna go off a little bit of what Nav was saying with regards to when uncomfortable situations come up. It's really important for our allies to get to a place where they feel comfortable speaking up, so that the people who are expected to, the people of color, don't have to always be the voice that's saying, no, this isn't right, and here are the reasons why. Because sometimes I feel like because of that happening, I don't feel like the weight or like there's not enough. It doesn't grab people enough because they keep hearing it from the same people. That being said, if I expand upon that a little bit more, with regards to dance, we don't have a tremendous amount of students of color in dance. And I know so much of that has to do with whether or not students are first generation, whether or not students had the money to go and take art classes, dance classes when they were younger. How do we encourage students who don't necessarily have those opportunities to get involved with dance? How do we make Eurocentric dance, ballet, and modern not seem like the hierarchy in the dance world? How do we bring in Polynesian dance, Latin American dance, African dance, other art forms, and elevate those so that these art forms are also valued as highly as ballet and modern?
And, and that was a question I wanted to ask a bit later, but since you brought it up, I'll go ahead and bring it up now. And this is just, throwing a question out to it to, to Charlotte, Nav, or you, Natasha. There are so many different industries, and a lot of you are representing these industries today. Financial world, law firms, dance. What are in speaking to leaders out there? What can we do to build a better pipeline of diversity? I have my own answer, but from you working within your own particular fields, you thinking with your own experience about how you got into, being a lawyer or a financial advisor or a dancer, how can we continue growing this pipeline into your relative industries?
I think it's exposure. I often tell people that if leaders of organizations or people who are hiring and they say they want a more diverse group, I'll say to them, look around you to all the things you go to and where you go, do all the people look just like you? Are they from the same background? Are they from the same, whether it's economic background or religious background or geographic? Are there people who, are they all men? Are they all white? And if that's the case, you probably need to change something about what you're going to and what you're participating in so that you actually meet more different kinds of people. So that then there's that exposure. I mean, it has to do with proximity, which is the word Brian Stevenson really came up with, but it's very true. It's the people we help, the people we end up mentoring and supporting in the workplace or any part of the world are people we have become proximate with in some way, and we become invested in them. And if we only become invested in people like ourselves, then we won't change the makeup of the workplace.
Representation is everything.
You want to expand on that,
Absolutely.
Natasha? Sorry, go ahead, Nav. Well, y'all just jumping all in. Go ahead, I love it.
No, I think that those are some wonderful points that Charlotte made. I think, there's a myriad of things that you can do. I think, recruiting is one of them, recruiting in more diverse sectors, where there's, like I said, individuals, people of color and more women, but then also, there's interesting things that companies and corporations can do. They can host potlucks to celebrate different nationalities. They can have prayer rooms, meditation rooms for different groups of ethnicities. So, there's direct ways and then there's indirect ways as well.
A problem I find sometimes in doing what you're asking us about, James, is oftentimes I have felt like when you go to the higher ups or your administrators to ask questions about, can we provide opportunities? How do we make opportunities? What I feel like happens is all of the responsibility of trying to make those type things happen fall back on you. For being the one asking. Not that you're not willing to help, but it's like, can you do everything?
Yeah. That's great. And so from our standpoint, right, just because, we're the ones that are asking and they don't see anybody else that looks like us. And so, they default, not either consciously or unconsciously, right? What advice would we give to our leadership, to help them build out this DEI, workspace? When they look at us and we've been brought on to the bank or the law firm or, to your company, we're here because of our track, but we want to have more people to look like us within there so we can feel a little more welcomed. So what advice would you give to them so it doesn't, you're not the one doing all the work, but help them start a foundation of creating a strategy to bring more Natasha, Charlottes, and Navs into their workplace?
I think it's helpful to remind them that as the leader, they have a lot of power of modeling. And so setting an example and setting the tone helps the entire organization. And I know that they then ask, the person of color or the woman to go to these things, invite that person along. Say, I want, whatever organization I'm going to or event, I want them to meet you because you're the leader of our organization and I want you to meet them. So include them, because sometimes it's the leader, even though we think that they are never uncomfortable, sometimes they're not sure if they should participate or how. And so bring them along so that they start being the face, not just, the person in my position.
I think those are wonderful points as well. I think, when it comes to leaders, another good strategy would be, courses on emotional intelligence and, cultural trainings. And, I think more leaders who, have better, emotional intelligence and are more culturally aware, they can better respond to their diverse populations, and then they can tailor their, communication responses to be more effective with this diverse population. And because I think one of the points you touched on, James, was retention. And I think a lot of that stems from, miscommunication or not having strong communication channels.
Great. Yeah. Excellent. And one thing that you guys pointed out through all of this is this term that came out of it, and Charlotte, you mentioned a little bit earlier, is mentorship, right? All of us, but how we've grown, we have some sort of mentors, where we consciously did it or not. And we do have a lot of undergraduates here that are looking to be in your respective fields or any other fields, and they're a woman or they're a person of color. So maybe share with them, like, how important is it, and how did a mentor help you get to where you are now? Maybe Charlotte, I'll start with you.
Okay, mentorship is very important. And the best mentorships are not those that are forced, but that are created naturally. However, historically, people naturally become mentors for people who are more like them. So we have to all work harder to be open and become mentors for lots of different kinds of people. And the best mentorship story I ever heard about inclusion, it has to do with recruiting somebody, but then not just plopping them and leaving them. Long ago, there were no women at any of the major law firms in Salt Lake. And a woman applied and didn't get accepted in the law firm. And there was a senior partner there, James Lee, who then spent the next year convincing all of the senior partners that we should have this woman come on board. And she came on board. And then he made a point to introduce her to clients, to show her the ropes. And she developed her own clientele, became a senior partner there and a well-regarded lawyer in Salt Lake. Now, she was smart and worked hard. He didn't give her anything, but just like all the men who start and are smart and work hard, she had somebody who cared about her future. And the key is to find that somebody who you're comfortable with, who can help you know the ropes. I know when I went to law school and started practicing law, I had parents who had never gone to college. I felt so less sophisticated than everyone else, so I was afraid. And having people around who I could go ask, like, what am I supposed to do at this event, was really helpful.
That's great. I love that story. I'm sorry, was someone chime in? Now, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the roles of mentors are, absolutely tremendous in your career. I had the chance to have Maria Garcia as my mentor, and she had a wealth of experience in, one of the most diverse sectors in community development. And, it allowed me to do things that I think other people wouldn't have been able to do by just having that mentorship. And then also, I didn't have to learn a lot of the same lessons that she had learned, as a result of her experience. So it was definitely, I think it gave me a fast track to, learning, about these new ideas and thoughts. But in terms of just the overall mentors, I think you really have to look at, individuals who, in your field are, successful, people that you want to be like. And I think you have to really reach out to them and find one, as Charlotte mentioned, that's, that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if anything, for a mentor, it's almost a compliment that someone would want to go to them for some guidance, for some help. At least for myself, when people ask me, either directly or indirectly that, they seek to me as a mentor, I'm like, oh, then I myself and become more intentional about what path I can create for those individuals. So as we talk about these paths that we're trying to create for these undergraduates, particularly that are listening in, maybe some graduates that are here in their careers and are really looking to grow, maybe kind of share with them like the ultimate type of inclusivity role, which means giving them some optimism here. In this homogenous state, we see you guys, growing and thriving in your field. Maybe share with them, how is your team strengthened by having someone like you as a person of color, as a woman, in your field?
I feel like having someone who looks differently than you is, for me, it is, and I have to remind myself, it's not as just in your face as it feels for me. It's obvious. It's when you have a circle of people or a group of people who have different backgrounds, be it race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, what have you, it invites a better learning, a better understanding of individuals that you may not have had the opportunity to be around at whatever point in your life. It gives you the opportunity to grow. It gives you more empathy, which then for me, as an educator, that is the information that I particularly want to carry on and give to my young people, so that no matter what demographic you sit in, if you happen to be the odd one out, you don't have to be the one always speaking up. And so the kids, I like to have these conversations with the kids because I want them to feel comfortable. What I feel like has happened in our generation is we didn't have this uprising in conversations about these things that we're having now since the pandemic. And now this voice of all these things that have been minimized or not shared over however many years is coming out, and it's very hard for people to handle and to take. And I feel like my personal role as an educator is to make sure that I'm having these conversations in my class. I don't care. I love dance. Dance is important, but I also feel like teaching my students how to be great contributing human beings to our community tops it. And the dance will come and it will be richer because of the conversation. And I want them to have the strength and the level of comfort that I don't feel like we were given.
I love that. When you get a more sense of community around you, you tend to thrive a whole lot better. I love that a lot. Charlotte, do you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, what I would say to undergraduates or people new in a career is that people actually like to help. They like to be helpful to others. So don't be afraid to ask people questions or ask people how to navigate things in the workforce. Because if you go and ask people, it's a way for them to see who you are, to get to know you better so they can become your champion. People like to be champions. A question I'm often asked by young women in the workforce is, how do I tell my employer I'm pregnant? How do I tell my employer I'm going to have a baby? And then what do I do? And what's the timing? And they're very concerned about it. And they're worried that, they're letting their employer down. And I often say to those women, men have heart attacks all the time in the workforce without any planning, without any transition. And we all come together and, make sure their work gets done and we care about them and move on. And if we all would treat, women having babies with that same community feeling, that would be great. And I tell leaders that too, who sometimes think that, it's a pain for women to have children in the workforce. And so no matter what the question is, whether it's about how to do work or how to communicate or how to get along with another person in the workforce, or, something more personal about having children, find somebody to ask and reach out to them. And you don't have to pick with just one person. You can watch lots of different styles and learn something from one and something else from another. Paying attention, being curious is the most valuable thing you can do for yourself and as an employee in the workforce.
Yeah, that's great, Charlotte. Coming with that servant leadership type mindset and leading kind of with sincere curiosity. I mean, that kind of leads in how we can start building bridges, which kind of gets me to my next question, because people want to do better as far as creating an inclusive environment and recruit and retain more diversity. And as Charlotte and Natasha, you guys pointed out earlier, and maybe Nav, you may be experienced as well, how do we have our voice and help lifting up these organizations, and try to navigate tokenization, right? Because sometimes we may just be tokenized either consciously or unconsciously, and how have you guys navigated? Have you embraced it and kind of moved on with it, or you just kind of let them know, what, I don't want to be tokenized, let's try it this way? Like, what's been your experience and how do you navigate that?
Well, I can share if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I share the very first moment that I felt it and recognized it, I graduated from college and I had started looking for work. And I had applied to do adjunct work at UVU, which at that time was UVSC. And I was hired as adjunct. And I'm saying the organization name, not because I'm like trying to call out anyone, but I think it's important for people to know that no matter where we are, these things happen everywhere we are, but I won't say names. However, I have been hired as an adjunct, and I'm teaching stepping, which is African-American dance form with body rhythms, hip hop, African. And I asked, why am I not teaching the beginning modern dance classes? That's what I got my major in. And a friend and a colleague shared, do not tell anyone, but the reason why you're not doing this is because you're too big.
Wow.
Damn.
Which I can go on, but I'll stop there.
Interesting. And I'm almost curious for you to go on, but I appreciate you just kind of, but you can stop there if you'd like. But it's, but it really does kind of shed a light on, they look at us for, at our color, and particularly in the dance world, because, just kind of thinking just the biases that put in place within the dance world, and how they see, certain cultures, right? And then they see you as in this particular Black culture, like, oh, well, Natasha's going to know about this, even though you specialized in modern dance, right? And so they kind of lead with what they see. So yeah, it's very fascinating there. Charlotte, Nav, you have something to add to your role as kind of tokenization? Nav, I felt like you were going to say something. No?
It just, in terms of navigating, the workspace, I think, I think really, what has helped me, I think, be successful within, the realm of each environment that I've worked in has been tailoring my communication approach, because I feel like, we have this mainstream culture and we know what not to say. Um, and we know certain ways to communicate, given, like I said, that our mainstream culture. But what I will say is that knowing those components and knowing how to communicate to certain groups of people, I think can really be helpful in, having your voice and sharing your concerns, because I think oftentimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it to make somebody a bit more empathetic and sympathetic of your situation and your circumstances.
Yeah, that's great.
I think it's helpful to let leaders know. I mean, I've been in a lot of situations where I'm the only woman in a room. It's all men, boards or executive committees. And I think it's helpful to let leaders know that there's nothing actually fun about that, that it's a burden and that it's exhausting, because then you're looked to for all of certain kinds of questions. And all you really want to be there is somebody who gets to work hard and be smart and solve problems. And so sometimes leaders don't recognize that by just having one of whatever you are is a huge burden for the person and probably not as useful to the organization.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go ahead, Natasha. Yeah.
I want to add to what Charlotte was saying. When this particular incident happened with myself, that was 2004. I was younger. I had a voice, but I told the line very differently than I do now. And now I don't have a problem doing what Charlotte said with regards to letting the other people that you work with know that, like, no, this is too much. This isn't fair. And let me tell you why. So with regards to speaking to our younger generation, I think we have to figure out, like, what are you willing to do? Are you willing? I mean, it sucks, but are you willing to bite the bullet and dig your way through until you can get out in the clearing and be doing what it is that you want to be doing? Or do you speak up and know that there could be, and hopefully not, but there could be repercussions that don't necessarily, not the ones that you want to invite. It's tricky, right?
Yeah. Well, how do we become these pioneers of change, right? Because, selfishly speaking, my work in the Utah Black Chamber, my goal is to increase this pipeline of diversity and have people stay here. And a lot of times it's challenging because of the lack of diversity. And to your point, Natasha, we're asking, we're encouraging, we're motivating to stay here, and knowing what they're about to step into, that they may have this burden that they may be confronted with. So how do we encourage our future leaders, our emerging leaders? How do we encourage them that could be these pioneers of change and help them navigate what's kind of in store for them?
So to begin, I think, apart from, the elements that we already talked about, the recruiting, the cultural trainings, emotional intelligence, apart from those things, I think it's holding people accountable. And, similar to what you're doing right now, James, being a moderator as a leader when somebody does something that's against the grain, being willing to have an uncomfortable conversation to help an individual who has, offended a person of color or woman accountable, and to help them, understand and be a bit more empathetic and sympathetic to people that are different than them. And I think it really starts with leaders, finding ways to cultivate, but also hold people accountable so that, there are, consequences for, poor behavior.
Yeah.
And having our leaders be a part of forums and discussions like this so that they can hear these things.
I do think for people just starting out, it's very hard sometimes to speak up. And it's very hard to know what to say when. And you always think, 24 hours later of sort of what the perfect response or perfect comment would have been. But, and there's no one size fits all. For some circumstances, maybe what you need to do is to go talk privately to somebody separately to explain how you were made to feel uncomfortable by a situation. And sometimes you might not feel like you're getting the right kind of work. I know a young woman who's an environmental scientist who was working in the field, and she was the only woman working in the field, and the guy in charge never had her do one of these assignments. I think it was to go watch owls at a particular time. And when she's telling me this later, she said, I don't know what it was about me that I couldn't do that. And we both thought that it was maybe her gender. And so we practiced this conversation for her to have with the guy in charge to say, I would like to be doing all the things everybody else is. Tell me what I need to do differently. Tell me what skill I don't have, or tell me where I'm lacking so that I can be have the same opportunities as everybody else. Sort of not putting the person in a box and telling them they're sexist, but trying to help them figure that out on their own with your questions. And, at some point you might just have to call them out on it, but there's a lot of different ways, and talking to people about how to do it and practicing those conversations can be very useful.
Yeah. You guys brought up something that's very key, because we talked a little bit earlier about mentorship, having someone that you can count on for advice, to kind of lead you in a way and give you that confidence to push you into your career. But you also talked about here sponsorship, finding someone to help you get into those doors, and take you along, basically just grabbing your hand and take you along. So how would we find these sponsors, and how do we ask somebody, like, can you not just saying flat out, can you sponsor me? Or maybe you say, can you sponsor me here? But, like for Charlotte, I want to get into being an attorney, and as a woman, maybe you can help me get there as well, or I'm trying to enter into the world of dance, and Natasha, I'm a voluptuous woman, and I see everything you're doing, like, how, can you help me open doors? So how would, as undergraduate, these future leaders, how would they just ask someone or find someone to kind of be their sponsor? Like, maybe you guys had one and you didn't even know, and maybe how did you ask your sponsor?
Similar to what you were just talking about, James, I think, when you're trying to look for a sponsor or, a mentor, you really have to, I think, look for, commonalities and similarities. And then when you reach out and you're writing an email, or you're, calling this individual, you want to be able to touch on those similarities so that there's, that connection on just a basic level. So that you can connect on something beyond, just the purpose of the sponsorship. And I think that if you do that, and if you can find somebody with, enough similarities or, enough common points or interests as you, I think it's a lot easier to go about, creating that, to creating that strong sponsorship.
Great.
I have to say, I was just very, very fortunate that I happened to luck into having some good sponsors or champions or mentors. In terms of people who have reached out to me, I think the best way to do it, and I think Nav hit on this a little, is for somebody to call you up or, find you somehow and ask you about something ask me about something I'm doing, or something I've written, or something I've commented on, and say, I want to know more about that, or I want to understand this better. But what is hard is when somebody just calls you up out of the blue and says, I would like you to be my mentor. Because then you're kind of like, well, what does that mean? But if it happens more naturally, I think it works better for both sides of that equation.
Love that. Thanks, Charlotte.
When I attended the U, I had I had a great connection, I feel like, with most of my professors, but there was one professor who, as I think about it, she was the only professor of color that I had. I went to school. It took me a long time to get out of school. I went to school for like 8 years. But in that time, Kay Richards, she was a Yannon. I had Kay Richards there. And at that time, I didn't know why I gravitated to her the way that I did. I mean, now I get it. And I mean, there were often times where I would just do my homework outside of her door. And then she'd open the door and she would say, "Why didn't you just knock and come in the office?" And I say, "Well, I didn't want to bother you." But there was like this level of comfort sitting next to her door. Um, and I don't know, I'm not really necessarily answering the question that you posed, James, but I'm going back to this idea of like the importance of having representation, because there's just, without ever knowing Kay initially, because I knew that she had some experience, some of the same experiences I had, I just gravitated.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it goes back to what Nav was saying about having that connection that you just kind of see that kind of leads you into that path of finding that mentor, finding that sponsor. So yeah, that's great. And so we have just a few more minutes here, and I want to have a couple of questions to just kind of wrap up with. And I think there's some, this kind of maybe answers some of the questions from the YouTube channel. Been monitoring that just a little bit. It's like, where do we go from here? So for each of you, I want each of you kind of answer this question. What changes have you seen as far as diversity in your workplace is for the better? And Nav, I'll go ahead and start with you, since we're both in the financial industry. So I'm just kind of curious about your perspective.
Yeah, so a few things. So at NeighborWorks had already had a strong base and foundation, for diversity, and I think Maria Garcia's leadership really cultivated inclusivity for a sustained period of time. In the financial industry at Morgan Stanley, it was a little different. It's still male dominated, mostly Caucasian. But Morgan Stanley has really made a concerted effort to, really push for diversity, and they've done things, such as, cultural sensitivity training programs, so that even leaders at the mid-level management position, now are okay with prayer spaces, meditation spaces, and they really have been more open to cultivating an inclusive environment for the diverse ethnic backgrounds and individuals within the state of Utah, particularly from the University of Utah. So I don't think we are sort of where we need to be. There's I think we touched on this a little bit before. I think you really have to have more representation as time goes on, because if you see a diverse background, that's one thing. But if you see diverse leadership, that can be the next level. That can take you from, a good space to, an even better space.
Before Charlotte and Natasha answer this question, and I'll forget if it leaves me, because you brought up a very important thing about diverse leadership. How do we get there? Right? Because I think when we look at diversity as a whole in Utah, people don't recognize 1 out of 5 people are a person of color. And mainly because we don't see people of color or enough women in leadership. So what is the next step? How do we get more diversity in leadership?
I think, similar to what I mentioned before, I think having, leaders really, take courses and try to be more emotionally intelligent and, culturally sensitive. I think, at any level, because I think if you have leaders who, let's say, hypothetically are Caucasian, and, they're taking these courses, they're trying to understand, they're trying to be better. I feel like that's going to lead to better communication outcomes, which is going to lead to, better relationships with the diverse, analysts and associates that they have, which, could then, for example, lead to more leadership positions. Because I think, Oftentimes, a promotion, for example, in the financial industry from analyst to VP, it's, about the relationship you have with your boss. And, if you can have better relationships and better communication channels, you can really, I think, facilitate better outcomes for these individuals.
Great. Thanks. Charlotte, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
So I think you ask the perfect and the most difficult question, because when I was in law school, 20% of the law school class was women. For a long time now, it's been 50% or more are women. But when you look at who's leading major law firms, who are judges, you do not see either people of color or women. I mean, we've had, I think in the history of Utah, only one African-American trial judge. We also have an African-American justice court judge. But when Tyrone Medley retired, there's no other African-American judge in our judicial system. And so that's sort of a negative point of view, but what do we do about it? We have to encourage people. We have to support people. When I became president of the Utah State Bar, there had only been one woman who was president before me. The only reason I ever pursued that is people told me I could do it. Charlotte, you can do this. Charlotte, try it. And we have to be telling more people to give them confidence and to help them. But we also have to find out, with law firms, like, why do women leave law firms? I personally believe, talking to women, they leave law firms because they don't feel like they're part of the club. They don't feel like they belong. They don't feel really included. So it's a lot more than just getting people. You have to really create a culture and environment that welcomes lots of different kinds of people. And that's hard. And I think we're making progress, but I think it's very slow, and we all have to work a lot harder every day. It's a daily task. It's a daily effort. It's not some big sweeping thing. It's every day we have to reach out to people and do better.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that. It's not, diversity and inclusion is not a marathon or a sprint or a destination, right? It's a journey, and it's an adventure, and it's constantly going to evolve. It's important that we stay connected and we continue to evolve as well, so we can continue grow in our welcoming within each of our industries. So going back to my original question then, Charlotte, is, what progress have you seen as far as diversity in the workplace, in the legal industry?
Well, you do see more women in judicial positions. You do see more women in the law. I think maybe nationally you might see more women leaders than you do locally. And I have to say, every time a new woman is elected to the bar presidency, I have us get together with all the past women presidents. And now there are enough that I have to use two hands to count them rather than just one. And you see more women involved in grading the bar exams and chairs of committees, and that's the pipeline. So I do think it's improving. I just think the progress is slower than probably what I thought it would be when I first got into the area of law.
Awesome. Natasha, what about you? What progress have you seen?
With teaching in secondary education and the pandemic, I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not, but I have not seen a whole lot happening. With regards to higher education, I've heard of positive things happening coming out of BYU, UVU, the University of Utah, with regards to creating spaces and forums and hiring more artists of color, which is great, and I still have that moment of like, okay, that's great. That's what you're doing this year. How are you going to keep this trajectory going? Like, let's not get excited about this thing because it's really heated right now, and then it just dies off when we forget about it after the pandemic. Not to say that I am not appreciative of the works that I'm hearing about the universities doing, but that as a person of color, as a woman, my question is, or my thought is, great, keep it up. don't let it drop. And with regards to secondary education, admittedly, I am a little frustrated because I do feel like we need to be doing a lot more.
Yeah. And you actually brought up a question, or you answered a question that I meant to ask and forgot about. It's like, how has the pandemic impacted diversity and inclusion in the workplace? And, when the civil unrest happened, you saw a lot of efforts being made. But prior to that, it kind of felt like things were kind of at a standstill. Really, no one kind of knew really what to do. And almost pushed it to the forefront, after the murder of George Floyd. And like you said, Natasha, we hope that it does continue. So it leads me to my last question: is where do we grow from here? Not necessarily where do we go, but where do we grow from here? How do we go up, right? Because, I've been involved in so many panel discussions, and there's been all this, and everybody else as well. I feel like people of color, and our influential leaders have been all over the place, educating, providing, creating awareness and all of this. And we wanted to go for naught, right? Like you were saying, Natasha, is like, how do we keep this momentum? How do we keep it going? And so as we close up, and I'll start with you, Charlotte, what advice would you give to the students here, to the graduates here, to be that voice, to continue the momentum, to ensure that we do have diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
So I think we have to be willing to figure out what actions we're going to take based on what we've read and what we've studied and what groups we've gone to. Like, what are the actions that will be different? And what are we going to do to make sure we know more people who are different from us? And this may be sort of a small example, but so I have grandchildren who are mixed race. And so when I buy them books, I try to make a point that they're not just filled with all white, blonde-haired kids. But, as I started doing that, I thought, well, every child should have books that have lots of different kinds of people in them. Our police officers, when they are children, should be reading books that have lots of different kinds of people in them. And so I've made an effort to make sure whenever I get anything for any child, it's more diverse, so that from a young age, people start to get comfortable with much more images of lots of different kinds of people in different kinds of roles. We spent a long time saying how important it was to have women on the Supreme Court, partly so we have a picture of a woman on the Supreme Court. And those pictures and those images are powerful. And let's make sure people have those from a very young age, all kinds of people.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. Natasha, how about you? What can we do going forward?
Never think that what you are doing to create inclusivity is too small. Every little thing that you do matters. It doesn't matter how big or small it is, it matters. I shared the Maya Angelou poem with some students just this week, The Human Family. And in the beginning of this poem, she talks about how we're all different, but by the end, she's saying we are more alike than not alike, my friend. Meet people who are different to you, have conversations, and don't put up walls or barriers. Be willing to be open. Be okay sitting in the discomfort. These conversations are not easy. These conversations are not comfortable. And I feel like our society has told us that we're supposed to feel good all the time. And that's not true. We learn the most when people make us have to think and reflect.
Yes, absolutely. We have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's where growth happens. Love it. Go ahead. Nav, why don't you go ahead and wrap us up here? How do we grow from here?
I just want to say I love that those points that Natasha made. That's really beautiful. You know, I think, you know, where do we grow from here? And you know, the advice I'd give to these undergraduate students is, you know, try to develop thick skin when going into the workforce, because you're going to experience things that are going to be difficult, that are going to be, you know, hard to comprehend. And I think that's number one. And number two, I think if you notice a pattern or behavior, a set of behavior in your organization, and you know that it's wrong, and you know that you want to, you know, inspire change in that direction, similar to what we talked about, is don't be afraid to reach out to leaders whom you trust, whom you've able to, you know, been able to have a relationship with. You know, that way you can further, you know, facilitate the discussion of inclusivity and diversity. And, you know, and if they don't respond, you know, find a different individual, because I think really what this takes is if from a person at the undergraduate level who wants to make a difference, is, you know, what this really takes is persistence.
Awesome. So great. So as we wrap up, you know, being persistent, resilient, grow that skin, be willing to be uncomfortable, right? And then we can find a way forward. So with that, thank you guys so much for being part of this panel discussion for diversity in the workplace. You guys shared some amazing points. We appreciate that. Now I would like to turn the time back over to Gabby or Carmen if they have any final words they'd like to share.
Yes, I would just like to echo and say thank you to all the panelists and to James for a wonderful conversation, and really this just being the beginning of many conversations. You know, I really like that, you know, how do we grow from here and where do we go from here? So really know that you can reach out to each one of these panelists, and we'll be sending for our undergraduate students and our alumni, we'll be doing a follow-up email with those contact information, as well as other resources and other events to continue this conversation. So really, again, thank you all for watching and for your support. Thank you to our U alumni for participating in this event, but also our alumni community, to our continued support for the university, and as well as our undergraduate partners here. So thank you for your time and conversation today, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.